Shadows under Laeveni. This is a quite substantial game book by David Lowery. It is substantial because it collects a trilogy, 3 game books that were originally published independently. They do form a single storyline if you read them in order, and they are called the Shadow Thief Trilogy. The story is set in a fantasy world, heavily inspired by fighting fantasy, which is fine. It's a big source of inspiration for modern game books. And in this fantasy world, you're a thief with your guild and everything, and you're known as Shadow, hence the name. In this video, I'm not gonna give you spoilers about the plot, so I'm not gonna talk about that in detail. But I will show you the inside of the book to talk about the text and to show some illustrations. So if you don't want to know anything about the contents, just look away. Just don't look at the screen. Pretend this is a podcast. So we got the Shadow Thief Trilogy. The 3 stories are called, well, the first one is called Jailbreak. I wonder what that is all about. I'm not giving you any spoiler, but you're a thief and the story is called Jailbreak. Figure it out. That leads to a story called Hunted. Who knows? And that leads to the third story called Heroes. And in that story, there's already implied in the title that I like very much and it's kind of unusual to see in game books. So I'm gonna not tell you, but if you want to know, just figure out a way to send me a private message, maybe on Board Game Geek, and I'll tell you so I don't spoil it for everybody. But there was something there that was really interesting and cool. The 3 stories are not of equal length. We start with a short story, maybe about 150 paragraphs, and then they become increasingly longer, and they also become increasingly more momentous. Jailbreak, probably something that has to do with you and your safety, and something happens that leads to the next story where the stakes become increasingly higher and they continue to increase in the third story. So I like the fact that the story becomes more powerful, so to speak, and also longer, more complex. The length matches the stakes that are in the story. The game system is heavily inspired by fighting fantasy. No problem there, although I do like to see some experimentation. It's a true and tested system that more than 40 years after it was created is still strong. And so you're gonna create your character by rolling dice and giving them fighting, ability, endurance, fitness, intelligence, and fortune. Like in fighting fantasy, this is a resource that is consumed when it is tested. Of course, I didn't use the logs on the book. What am I, crazy? I keep track of things on a separate sheet of paper. And when it comes to combat, again, it's pure fighting fantasy in that you roll 2 dice for yourself and add your skill, 2 dice for the opponent adds theirs. Whoever has the highest total hits the opponent for 2 points of damage. And that's the combat. If anything, is a little simpler than fighting fantasy. What we have different is the skills. So that allows you to customize your characters more. You select skills from this range here. It gives more personality to your character, and also to me that borrows from another classic fantasy series that I like very much, Lone Wolf, in which we also had skills that had the same purpose. And then you're ready to start. So the stories, the plots, the game system, everything is fine and everything is pretty enjoyable. Again, classic stories with a classic system, nothing wrong with that. Enjoyable challenges. What is different, which I also enjoyed for a while, it's that Larry has definitely an interest in horror, although these are not horror stories. They are classic fighting fantasy adventures in which from time to time there is a very detailed, gory description. And when you die, maybe there's a detailed description of where exactly the blade of the enemy penetrated and what exactly it did to you and where your various body parts are right now. But other than that, other than those isolated moments, again, the story is pretty classic otherwise. So again, I said, oh, that was interesting for a while, but then also I didn't think that overall it added all that much to the experience. But it didn't bother me either because I don't mind horror. So I was enjoying or trying to enjoy these fighting fantasy kind of stories with horror moments, but there were two things that detracted from the experience to me. One is the illustrations. I'm not a huge fan of these illustrations. Larry himself makes them, and to me they're a little too much on the amateurish side, especially when it comes to the human figure. Environments, buildings, not so much. Of course, it is with humans that we have the strongest emotions and connections. And again, having grown up with the professionally illustrated books in the fighting fantasy or so many other series, these are just not. These are too much on the fanzine side for me. And then the other significant offender is grammar and spelling. Language is the tool. Language is the blocks of the story here. It's what conveys the story. And unfortunately, as we often see in self-produced books, there is just a carelessness that I'm not used to because I read so many professionally edited books. And when the grammar messes up very frequently, you can't go 2-3 paragraphs without spotting a glitch. Well, that's precisely the point. It's like playing a video game that constantly glitches. It's hard to be immersed. It pulls me out of the experience and the story, and I start getting irritated. Look, if in a book this thick, there were 10, 15 instances when I spot something that doesn't quite work, I wouldn't even be mentioning it. But here it happens all the time. And I started writing down some, again, a tiny minority. I even spotted patterns. For example, quite often you'll find the plural form used instead of the genitive. And this is almost universal, happens all the time with proper nouns. If Livia has a room, now is Livia's room spelled like that. If Inista has a seal, now is Inista's seal. The plural form of proper nouns or characters nouns as the genitive is used all the time. Homophones, like we know that the room, it's, or the door, it's locked, or the tavern is so quiet. Strange verbs like do you spoken to? I don't know, do I spoken to? But most importantly, sometimes there are missing words that really affect the meaning of the sentence. Jacques or Jack is a character, and at some point you Jack in the room. I don't know what I'm supposed to do to Jack. From the context, I kind of get a sense. Incidentally, that's really important for the plot, and there's an ambiguity caused by a missing word there. And possibly, however, didn't write them down, it would take me too long. The biggest offender is the lack of full stops at the end of sentences. That happens so many times there's a sentence that ends into the big void, the great nothingness. And that again, it's quite distracting. Oh, there you go. I open the text randomly, and there it is. Again, is it a small thing? If it is for you, you're going to be fine. But sometimes then we actually make up for it with 2 stops. Is the big deal? And there's another one. There you go. Is the big deal for you? You decide. Having that happen all the time, while also there are all of these other things. Again, it pulls me out of the experience. And it really can ruin a scene. You know that the author is trying to build an ominous scene, and then somebody throws their prostate to the ground. That just ruins the mood to me. So, this is my assessment. If this book underwent some professional editing and now the text was clean, the punctuation was clean, and I was able to really enjoy it, I would be a lot more impressed. What you have here is unfortunately a text that has not been edited professionally, that does not stand up to the standards of the Gamebook as we know it. Has great potential, it can be fun, and maybe if you don't care about all those grammar-based elements, you will enjoy it. It's a solid fighting fantasy type trilogy with horror moments and very poor editing. And this is my assessment of the Shadow Thief trilogy, Shadows under Laeveni.